December 31st, 1600. In a cold room in London, 218 merchants sign a royal charter. They are not soldiers. They are not nobles. They are tradesmen, wool merchants, spice dealers, a couple of former Lord Mayors looking for one more venture before retirement. They give their new company an almost comically modest name: the Governor and Company of Merchants of London Trading into the East Indies. Their only ambition on this freezing December afternoon is to buy pepper and silk a little more cheaply than their European rivals. 257 years later, the descendants of this trading company will command an army twice the size of Britain's own military. They will govern more than 150 million people. They will rule, in every meaningful sense, an empire larger than the one that chartered them. This is not a story about an army marching in to conquer a nation. It's a story about how a company answerable to shareholders, obsessed with quarterly profit, became one of the most powerful governments the world has ever seen. And it happened almost entirely through the calculated betrayal of one man in one field on one June afternoon. For more than a century after that charter was signed, the East India Company was exactly what it claimed to be: a trading firm, nothing more. The company built its first permanent base at Surat in 1613 after securing trading rights from the Mughal Emperor Jahangir himself. Over the following decades, it expanded along India's coastline, establishing trading posts at Madras, then Bombay, then a modest settlement on the Hooghly River that would eventually grow into Calcutta. These early outposts had minimal fortifications, small garrisons. They existed to load ships with cotton, indigo, silk, and saltpeter and send them home to Britain. The company paid local rulers for the privilege of trading. It asked for nothing more than permission. For 150 years, that arrangement held. What changed it wasn't a master plan drawn up in a London boardroom. It was the slow collapse of the empire that had been keeping the peace. By the early 1700s, the Mughal Empire, which had once unified almost the entire subcontinent under a single throne, was coming apart. Succession wars, provincial governors acting as independent rulers in everything but name, regional kingdoms rising in the empire's place, the Marathas in the west, the Nawabs of Bengal and Awadh in the east, the Nizam in the south, each one powerful within its own borders, none of them powerful enough or unified enough to fill the void the Mughals had left behind. India, by the mid-18th century, was not one nation waiting to be conquered. It was dozens of rival states watching each other with suspicion, each one looking for an advantage over its neighbors. The East India Company didn't create this fragmentation. It simply noticed it. And the company wasn't the only foreign power paying attention. The French East India Company had spent decades building its own network of forts and alliances along the southern coast, and the two trading companies fought repeated wars between 1701 and 1761 simply to determine which one of them would get to exploit India's instability first. The British wagered something simple. In a land of competing kingdoms, the side with better trained soldiers, more reliable financing, and fewer scruples about whose throne they helped decide would not need to conquer India. It could be invited in, kingdom by kingdom, as a tool other Indian rulers used against each other. In 1756, the new Nawab of Bengal, a young man named Siraj-ud-Dowlah, inherited his throne, and inherited along with it a deep suspicion of the British trading post growing inside his territory. He ordered the company to stop reinforcing its fortifications in Calcutta. When they refused, he marched on the city himself, captured it, and what followed became one of the most infamous incidents in the entire colonial period. Dozens of British prisoners, by most contemporary accounts, dying in a single suffocatingly overcrowded cell that came to be known as the Black Hole of Calcutta. The British did not retreat. They sent reinforcements from Madras under the command of a 31-year-old officer who had started his career not as a soldier, but as a company clerk. His name was Robert Clive. Clive retook Calcutta within weeks. But retaking a city was never going to be enough to secure the company's position in Bengal, the richest, most valuable province on the entire subcontinent. What Clive needed was Bengal itself, and he found a way to take it without fighting for it at all. Inside Siraj-ud-Dowlah's own court, resentment against the young Nawab was already simmering. He was unpredictable, often cruel to his own commanders, and deeply unpopular with Bengal's powerful banking families, who feared what his erratic rule meant for their fortunes. Clive found his opening in one man, Mir Jafar, the Nawab's own commander-in-chief. Through secret negotiations brokered with the help of Bengal's wealthiest banking dynasty, Clive made Mir Jafar an offer that required no battle at all. Betray your Nawab on the battlefield. Become the next ruler of Bengal yourself. Mir Jafar agreed. On the morning of the battle, Siraj-ud-Dowlah's army numbered roughly 50,000 men, infantry, cavalry, and artillery officered by French allies. Clive commanded barely 3,000. By the standards of any conventional military engagement, what happened next should never have ended the way it did. A sudden monsoon downpour soaked the Nawab's gunpowder, silencing much of his artillery at the critical moment. And as the battle began, the largest portion of Siraj-ud-Dowlah's army and the divisions commanded by Mir Jafar simply did not fight. They stood, watched, and waited. Siraj-ud-Dowlah's forces collapsed within hours. The Nawab fled the battlefield. He was captured days later and executed. Robert Clive's casualties that day numbered around 22 killed. In a single afternoon, decided as much by bribery as by gunpowder, the East India Company had gained effective control of the richest province in the Indian subcontinent. What happened after Plassey is in some ways more important than the battle itself. Mir Jafar, now installed as the company's puppet Nawab, quickly proved unable or unwilling to provide the British with everything they had been promised. By 1764, tensions between Bengal and the company erupted again, this time at the Battle of Buxar, where company forces decisively defeated a coalition that included the Mughal emperor himself, Shah Alam II. This time there was no ambiguity about who held power. In 1765, the defeated Mughal emperor formally granted the East India Company the Diwani, the legal right to collect tax revenue across Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. Read that carefully. A private trading company, accountable to shareholders in London, not to any government, not to any crown, had just become the official tax authority over one of the wealthiest regions on Earth. The company now had something no trading firm in history had ever possessed: a captive revenue stream extracted directly from millions of people who had no representation, no recourse, and no say in how that money was spent, and the company spent a significant portion of it doing something almost unthinkable. It used Indian tax revenue to buy Indian goods, which it then sold back to Europe at a profit. Bengal was, quite literally, paying for its own exploitation. This new arrangement came at a human cost that is almost impossible to overstate. In 1770, just 5 years after the company secured the Diwani, Bengal was struck by a catastrophic famine. Company policies, aggressive revenue extraction that continued even as crops failed, and a refusal to adjust tax demands to the realities of the harvest turned a difficult agricultural year into a humanitarian catastrophe. An estimated 10 million people died. The company that had promised efficient governance and orderly trade had, within 5 years of taking power, presided over one of the deadliest famines in recorded history, a famine that historians would later argue was made dramatically worse, not better, by the very administration that claimed to be modernizing Bengal. From this single foothold in Bengal, the company's expansion across the subcontinent became almost unstoppable. Bengal's revenue financed new campaigns against Mysore in the south, against the Maratha Confederacy in the west, against Oudh in the north. Each victory brought more territory brought more revenue financed the next campaign. By 1800, the company's standing army, on which it numbered roughly 3,000 European troops at Plassey, had grown into a force of over 250,000 soldiers, twice the size of Britain's own army on the other side of the planet. By 1858, the company, directly or through the princely states bound to it by treaty, controlled essentially the entire Indian subcontinent, what is today India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and parts of Myanmar. 150 million people. Governed ultimately by a corporation headquartered in a single building on Leadenhall Street in London, a corporation whose original purpose, 258 years earlier, had been nothing more ambitious than buying pepper at a fair price. The East India Company's rule did not end the way it began, quietly, through negotiation and incremental advantage. It ended in 1858 in the aftermath of a massive armed rebellion that swept across northern India the previous year, a rebellion the company's own private army could not contain on its own. The British Crown finally stepped in and dissolved the company's political authority entirely, taking direct control of India as a formal colony of the British Empire, a state of affairs that would last another 90 years. What makes this story unsettling isn't really the battle at Plassey, or even the scale of what the company eventually came to rule. It's how ordinary the beginning was. Nobody in that cold London room in December 1600 set out to conquer a subcontinent. There was no master plan for empire. There was a trading license, a modest charter, and 218 men who wanted a better price on silk. What turned a trading company into a government was a series of individually reasonable decisions: defend the trading post, exploit a local rivalry, secure a tax concession, fund the next campaign with the proceeds of the last one, each one small enough to seem justified in the moment. By the time anyone stepped back far enough to see what those decisions had added up to, the company controlled an army twice the size of the nation that founded it. There was no dramatic conquest. There was only a shareholder meeting, 257 years long. If you want to see more stories like this, the empires, the companies, and the decisions that quietly changed the world, subscribe. New documentary every week.